The cold wind whispered through the empty cemetery as a young girl knelt beside a simple gravestone, her tiny fingers tracing the name etched into the stone. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she clutched a small, worn-out photograph to her chest. "Mom, I miss you," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the rustling leaves. She wasn't expecting an answer, but in that moment, she wished with all her heart that someone, anyone, would tell her everything would be okay. From a short distance away, an old man watched her, his face shadowed by a tattered hood. He had seen her before, always coming alone, always crying. Something about her sorrow felt familiar, like a distant memory he couldn't quite place. He hesitated, debating whether to approach her, but instead, he tightened his grip on the small, leather wallet in his hands, the very thing that had unknowingly set a chain of events into motion. Just hours earlier, his life had been different. He was used to being invisible, just another homeless man that people walked past without a second glance. Life on the streets had taught him not to expect kindness. But when he stumbled upon a lost wallet near the park bench where he often slept, something inside him wouldn't let him ignore it. Maybe it was the way the wallet looked so out of place. Maybe it was the small photo tucked inside, a smiling woman with a little girl in her arms. Whatever it was, he knew what he had to do. He had spent the afternoon walking from place to place, asking strangers if they recognized the face in the photo. Most ignored him, some gave him wary glances, but then, finally, he found someone who knew. "That's Emily's mom," a store clerk had said, nodding toward the girl who now sat by the grave, weeping. "She passed away last year. That little girl, she's been through a lot." The old man's heart clenched as he looked at the girl again. He knew loss, knew what it felt like to carry a hole inside you that never quite heals. But there was something else too, a strange pull, as if this moment was meant to happen. He had spent so long believing the world had nothing left to give him, yet here he was, holding something that might just change both their lives. Taking a deep breath, he finally stepped forward, his hands trembling slightly as he reached out. "Excuse me," he said softly. The girl turned, startled, her tear-filled eyes meeting his. For a second, she looked afraid, unsure whether to stay or run. "I think this belongs to you," he said, gently placing the wallet beside her. "I found it, and I just thought it should come back to where it belongs." Her small hands hesitated before picking it up. The moment she opened it and saw the photo inside, her breath hitched. This was my mom's," she whispered, looking up at him, eyes wide with disbelief. The old man nodded. "I believe she would have wanted you to have it." For the first time in what felt like forever, there was silence between them. Not the kind that was lonely, but the kind that carried understanding. And just as the old man was about to turn and leave, the girl did something that caught him completely off guard. She reached out and took his hand. And in that moment, neither of them knew it, but their lives were about to change in the most unexpected way. The old man stood frozen, his weathered hand wrapped gently in the tiny, warm grip of the girl. He hadn't felt a touch like that in years, one that held neither fear nor pity, just simple trust. His throat tightened as he looked down at her. She wasn't crying anymore. Instead, she was staring at him, searching his face for something. Maybe she was trying to understand why a stranger would go out of his way to return something so small yet so precious. "Who are you?" she finally asked, her voice soft but filled with curiosity. The man hesitated. Who was he? Once, long ago, he had a name, a home, a family. Now he was just another forgotten soul on the streets, a face that blurred into the background of the city. He cleared his throat. "Just someone passing through," he said, offering a small, tired smile. "Someone who knows how much memories like these matter." The girl looked back at the wallet in her lap. She ran her fingers over the edges as if afraid it might disappear. My mom, she used to carry this everywhere. She said it kept all the important things safe. Her voice wavered. I thought it was gone forever. The man nodded. He understood that feeling all too well. The ache of losing something or someone you thought would always be there. A gust of wind swept through the cemetery, rustling the branches above them. The girl shivered slightly, and the man instinctively slipped off his old, frayed jacket and draped it over her small shoulders. "It's getting cold," he said. "You should head home." She clutched the jacket tightly, her big eyes locking onto his. "Do you have a home?" He didn't answer right away. What was there to say? The truth. That home for him was a cardboard mat under a bridge. That warmth was a rare luxury, and kindness an even rarer one. He forced another smile, this time weaker. "I do all right." But the girl wasn't convinced. She had lost too much to be fooled by words. Before she could say anything else, a voice called out from the distance, "Emily." She turned quickly, spotting a woman standing by the cemetery's entrance. Her aunt. The woman looked worried, scanning the area until her eyes landed on Emily and the man beside her. The old man stepped back, instinctively pulling away. He had seen that look before, the guarded suspicion, the silent judgment. Emily grabbed his hand again before he could leave. "Wait," she said quickly. "Will I see you again?" He hesitated. What was the point? He was nobody, just a man who had done one decent thing in a life filled with regret. And yet something about the way she held on to him made it impossible to lie. "Maybe," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Reluctantly, Emily let go, clutching the wallet to her chest as she ran to her aunt. The woman wrapped an arm around her protectively, still watching the old man with wary eyes. Then, without another word, they turned and walked away. He stood there for a long time after they left, staring at the spot where she had been. The warmth of her touch still lingered in his fingers. For the first time in years, he felt seen. But life had a way of reminding him where he belonged. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the cold returned, and so did reality. With a heavy sigh, he turned and made his way back toward the only place he knew, an alley behind a convenience store, where an old cardboard box and a thin blanket were all he had to shield him from the night. Yet as he lay there staring up at the dark sky, something felt different. The girl, her kindness, the way she had looked at him, it stirred something deep inside him. A memory of a time when he had been someone else, someone who had a name. And then, as if the universe itself wasn't done with him, fate intervened. The next morning, as he sat outside the same convenience store, trying to shake off the stiffness in his joints, a sleek black car pulled up to the curb. The door opened, and a woman stepped out. It was Emily's aunt. She hesitated for a moment before walking toward him, her expression unreadable. "You're the man from yesterday," she said, crossing her arms. "The one who returned the wallet." He nodded cautiously, unsure where this was going. She studied him for a long moment before reaching into her purse and pulling out a small envelope. "Emily wouldn't stop talking about you," she said. "She wanted to thank you. And I wanted to as well." She held out the envelope, but he didn't take it. He had seen enough pity in his life to recognize it. "I don't need money," he said quietly. The woman sighed, shaking her head. "This isn't charity. Just an opportunity." That caught him off guard. "I run a small business," she continued. "We need help. Cleaning, stocking shelves, nothing fancy, but it's honest work." She looked him in the eye, as if searching for something. "I don't know what brought you to this point, and I won't ask. But if you want a second chance, it's yours." He opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. A job, a chance to start over. It was something he had stopped dreaming about long ago. But before he could decide, a small voice called from the car. "Mom, is that him?" Emily's face peeked out from the window, her eyes bright with hope. In that moment, the old man realized something. Life had already taken so much from him. But maybe, just maybe, it was finally trying to give something back. And the choice was his to make. The old man stood there, staring at Emily's hopeful face through the car window. His heart pounded. He had spent years believing that second chances were for other people, not for someone like him. But now, as he looked into the eyes of the little girl who had held his hand so tightly the day before, he felt something shift inside him. He turned back to her aunt, who was still holding out the envelope, waiting for his answer. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for it, not out of fear, but because for the first time in a long time, he felt like he had something to lose. I don't know if I can do this," he admitted, his voice raw with uncertainty. "It's been so long since anyone trusted me to be something more than just what I am now." Emily's aunt gave him a long, thoughtful look. "Then start small," she said simply. "Show up tomorrow, just for a day. If it doesn't work out, no hard feelings." She didn't push, didn't pressure him. She just left the choice in his hands, and maybe that was what made all the difference. With a slow nod, he whispered, "Okay." The next morning, he arrived at the small shop where Emily's aunt had offered him work. It wasn't much, just a little convenience store tucked between old buildings. The kind of place most people walked past without a second glance. But to him, it felt like a doorway into a life he had forgotten. The first few days were hard. His body ached from years of sleeping on cold pavement, and his hands shook from hunger he had learned to ignore. But he showed up. Every morning, he pushed open that door, put on the uniform they gave him, and did his best. And slowly, things started to change. At first, the customers were wary of him. Some recognized him from the streets, their eyes filled with doubt. But then they saw the way he carefully stacked the shelves, the way he greeted them with quiet respect. They noticed how he never took more than he needed, how he stayed late to sweep the floors even when no one was watching. Emily visited often, always beaming when she saw him behind the counter. "You look different," she said one day, tilting her head as she studied him. "Happier." He smiled at that. Maybe she was right. Weeks passed, then months. The small paycheck he earned wasn't much, but it was enough to rent a tiny room in a rundown apartment. For the first time in years, he had a bed to sleep in, a door he could lock, a place to call his own. And yet, the biggest change wasn't in his circumstances, it was in how he saw himself. One evening, as he wiped down the counter, Emily ran into the store, breathless and excited. "Come with me," she urged, tugging at his sleeve. "I have something to show you." Curious, he followed her outside. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the quiet street. She led him down the sidewalk, past the familiar cemetery where they had first met, until they stopped in front of a small stone bench beneath a tree. "Sit," she said, grinning. He did. And then she reached into her pocket and pulled out something small. A worn-out photograph. It was the same picture from the wallet, the one of Emily and her mother. But this time, it wasn't just the two of them. There, carefully taped to the corner, was a new picture. A picture of him. He stared at it, his throat tightening. "You're part of my family now," Emily said softly. "Mom would have wanted it that way." Tears welled in his eyes, but he blinked them away, nodding as he let out a shaky breath. For so long, he had believed that life had forgotten him, that he was too far gone to ever find his way back. But standing there, with Emily beside him, he realized something. Sometimes second chances come in the most unexpected ways.